So coming up this weekend is going to be UFC Vegas 100. It is the 100th fight night taking place in the UFC Apex. And yeah, we're here. It's a milestone I think nobody wanted to hit. But hey, I mean, it should be a fun card. I'm not really expecting it to be the best one. It very much is a typical Apex card, but it should be fun, and Carlos Prates is a lot of fun. Now, I am going to warn you guys, I think that this intro is going to be pretty long. I have quite a few things to actually talk about right now. The first one is, I do apologize, I misinterpreted the way that we changed my affiliate link on the We Want Picks the We Want Picks $10 per month membership. It used to be a free trial. Unfortunately, we had to change that because people would sign up for a free trial, join the Discord, and then what they would do is use the moderation tools and the perks that you get, and then they'll just kind of abuse them to just kind of do bad things in the Discord. I think it's like 8,000 members in that Discord. It's not a Discord that we want to get taken down, and people are trying to take it down by abusing my free trial. So although I know a lot of you guys probably really enjoyed the fact that you could use a free trial and see what was going on behind the paywall, unfortunately it is just a case of a couple of bad eggs ruining it for everybody else. So now we have had to change the way that it works, and it is now 10% off your first order. Now, I thought that it was 10% off every single month if you signed up. That's what I said last week. I was wrong. I do apologize about that. It's 10% off a one-off, so the best way that you could use it is if you have been a long-time member of We Want Picks, is if you wanted to sign up for an entire year, then you can get 10% off a one-year membership. Or the way that I think that most people will probably use it is you just can get 10% off a month if you do sign up using my code Artem. You do save $1, but $1 is $1. Of course, at the end of the day, you can go and buy a couple chocolates with it. I mean, that's what I have been doing at the moment because I am studying for my exams. If you guys didn't know, I am a civil engineering university student, and I have had 3 exams so far, with my final exam being my structural design engineering, I believe is the official name of the course. It's on Friday. Shouldn't be too hard. I've had my hardest one so far, so I'm not really feeling too stressed about it. But I did just have an exam today, and it didn't go well. So I'm not really in the best mood, I will be honest with you guys. So a couple of people will probably catch some strays in this video. I do apologize to them. Now let's just get into it. That was a long intro, 2.5 minutes, but I did, of course, have a couple of things to talk about. Tresean Gore is fighting Antonio Trocoli, the first fight of the night. There's quite a few things actually to mention here. Tresean Gore's returning. He's had a couple of years away. I believe he was actually booked to fight and then got injured, and it was a pretty bad injury, so he's been away for 2 years due to injury. And Antonio Trocoli got signed on short notice to fight against Sharaputdin-Magomedov, but before that he was signed on short notice a couple of times to fight different opponents on short notice. Now, the thing about Antonio Trocoli is he has not had a very good fight camp, I don't think. He was, according to an MMA Junkie article, you can Google this, I know I mention quite a few controversies in the MMA world kind of briefly in my videos. It's usually just because I don't want to shine too much light to them, but I will mention this one. If you just search it up, there's an MMA Junkie article. Antonio Trocoli was arrested, according to this article, so allegedly arrested for being just being a bit of a meanie, I'll be honest with you guys. So he was arrested on the 9th of October. That's less than a month ago at the time of me recording this video. Probably not had the best camp because of it. Tresean Gore coming back from injury. To talk about the actual fighters themselves, Antonio Trocoli stepped up on short notice against Sharaputdin-Magomedov. Nobody really knew what to expect. This guy was fighting at 205 pounds against bad competition and not fighting regularly as well. And he also failed a drug test against Kenneth Burr, and then was meant to fight against Kenneth Burr again and pulled out. Anyway, that's another whole situation that I'm just going to avoid. Trocoli, he's a grappler, and that's kind of it. Against Sharaputdin-Magomedov, I guess in hindsight, considering Armen Petrosian got knocked out by him, didn't look that bad. But watching that fight, that was a really bad performance for Sharaputdin as well. It kind of looked like he just didn't know what to expect out of Trocoli, and the takedowns kind of spooked him. He was only really throwing one strike at once, and Trocoli was just kind of tanking them. It wasn't really a good performance for both. Now, Tresean Gore is a guy that I have actually been somewhat critical of in the past. I think that he was just signed a little bit too soon to the promotion, man. I don't think that's a hot take at all. He didn't start off too hot. He was in The Ultimate Fighter a couple of years ago, and quite a few guys from that season haven't really found the most success in the UFC. I mean, Gilbert Urbina, I believe, is 1 and 2 right now. Ryder Newman, I think fought for Eagle FC at some point, but hasn't been able to make his way back into the promotion. So Tresean Gore, he's lost a couple of fights now, but he's a striker and he is going to be dangerous, and I think he is going to throw more volume than Trocoli is on the feet, and Trocoli just didn't really look like he knew how to get a good takedown against Sharaputdin Magomedov, who we know doesn't have the best takedown defense. Now, it probably is improving a lot now that he is in the UFC and probably is able to put a lot more money toward his training camps, but I think that Tresean Gore can defend takedowns, which are going to come, and Trocoli just hasn't shown to be a threat on the feet. So I am going to pick Tresean Gore to win. I'm going to pick him to win by KO. Don't put money on this fight. It's not worth it. I know that's very, very big for me to say, as somebody who, I'll admit it, I did have money on Brentson Ribeiro to win by knockout in round number 1. It was paying plus 825, and I fell for the price tag. I apologize for that, but yes, that was not a good one. But I did overall do quite well tailing Angelo and Jacob's parlays. I mean, the safety parlay hit, and a couple other parlays that Angelo and Jacob put up for that Canadian card did go well. Cortavious Romious makes his debut now against Gaston Bolanos. I actually quite enjoy Gaston Bolanos in the UFC. At first, I was incredibly skeptical because this guy was signed from Bellator. He was 1-2 in his last fight when he was signed to Bellator, and he wasn't very active, but he come in. He had a pretty fun fight against Aaron Phillips. Now, he didn't look great, but he was fun. At the end of the day, he was a lot of fun. And then he did fight against Marcus McGee. Gave Marcus McGee a decent fight, but McGee, just as we know, he's a little bit old to be a prospect, but he is a bit of a savage in there, man. He's going to be a tough guy for anyone. He fights now against Cortavious Romious. I like Romious, but I don't think that he's a bantamweight. I know that he's fought at 150 pounds at points in his career. I know he spent a lot of time at 145 prior to the Contender Series, and he is mostly a grappler. That kind of is the way that Romious fights. He just comes forward, throwing heavy leather. Not really the most technical striker, but he's going to come forward and he's going to bomb away. And I wasn't that impressed by his performance against Michael Imperato. Michael Imperato is a grappler himself, but he's a bit of a limited striker. And Imperato was able to find a lot more boxing success in that matchup than I expected him to. And if Gaston Bolanos can keep the fight on the feet, which is going to be a question, I think that he can win. I think that he can beat Cortavious Romious here. I don't think that Romious really is like a super high level guy. I know Dana White absolutely loves him. I think he's got fantastic grappling, but I think on the feet, although he comes forward and bombs away and it's going to be a lot of fun, he's going to be so much fun in the UFC. He's taking on a very nice technical striker here. Gaston Bolanos, he's got a great striking pedigree, very, very fun style, very, very well known for his spinning attacks. He got multiple spinning KOs in his time in Bellator. Do I think he lands one of those against Romious? I'm going to say no, but I do think that he's going to find the most success on the feet in this matchup, and I am going to pick Gaston Bolanos, and I am going to pick Gaston Bolanos by KO, because as we know, Romious, he's aggressive, he's wild, he can get caught. Now, yes, he did get knocked out in 30 seconds by Ramon Taveros, but that is the price that you pay when you are going to just kind of risk it all and trade in the pocket. And Bolanos, he's a seasoned striker, man. I do believe in him. I think he can keep the fight on the feet. And now we can move on to, I guess, a somewhat similar matchup. I guess you could argue in the fact that Melissa Mullins is fighting against Klaudia Sygula. Klaudia Sygula, she seems to be a striker. Now, I was able to find some fights on her. The first thing I want to say about her is it's obvious why she's signed. She is beautiful. She looks to be a striker, and she does look to be quite small for the weight class as well. I was actually looking into this fight and I was watching her fights, which most of them have been at bantamweight, and I was thinking, oh, is she going to fight at 125 in the UFC? And the answer is no. Now, to be fair, she did look a lot bigger in her most recent matchup, which wasn't even an MMA fight. I think it was some sort of kickboxing, sort of mixed rules matchup, because when they closed in the clinch, the ref would just separate them. So I think it was more of a kickboxing fight than anything. But I was watching one of her fights. It was an old one. You can find it on YouTube here in 2021. And she looked quite small for the weight class, I thought. But she did look like she had put on quite a bit of size in her more recent fight. She looks to be a striker, but she does also look that she can be controlled on the ground pretty easily. And I think that this might just be, honestly, a exact same stylistic matchup for Melissa Mullins as her fight was against Daria Zelenziakova, where she's taking on a dangerous striker from the Poland, Russia, European area of the world. And I think that if she gets the fight down to the ground, Sygula has shown that she can be controlled on the ground before, and I think that Mullins can find some success in that area. I think that Mullins is pretty good. I know that she did lose recently. I know that she has missed weight now. I think she missed weight twice in the UFC. But she is a prospect that, I mean, being 33 years old now at women's 135 is getting up there in age. But she was a good signing for the UFC, I thought. And it's not like Daria Zelenziakova hasn't found her own success in the promotion despite losing to Island Perez recently. Hopefully, Sygula can maybe have a good career in the UFC. She's still pretty young, but I do think that Melissa Mullins is just going to be too good in the wrestling and grappling in this matchup. Looks like the Tapology boys are back at it again, picking Klaudia Sygula, just like they were picking Ivana Petrovic last weekend. Even though Petrovic probably should have been given that decision, it is what it is. Cody Stamann fights now against... Cody Stamann, I should say, sorry, fights now against Damon Blackshear. It just kind of comes down to how little does Cody Stamann have left in the tank. I think for a while now that answer has been not a lot. Now, I am potentially on an island here with this take, but if you do go to MMA decisions, it seems like it's 60-40 in the favor of Luana Lacerda here, because I thought that Luana Lacerda actually beat Cody Stamann in that fight. Now, if you just look at the stats, Luana Lacerda did outland... Cody Stamann did outland Luana Lacerda like 100 strikes to 80 strikes or so, but in a pure striking matchup, I thought that Lacerda won. And he attempted some takedowns as well, but takedowns do not mean anything. It's a damage-based scoring criteria. Please remember that. And then after that, he's had some weird performances, man. I believe he attempted 1 or 2 takedowns against Douglas Silva de Andrade, just accepted defeat, literally chose to lose by not wrestling in that fight. And then against Taylor Lapulus, he attempted 6 takedowns. He attempted, I believe, 4 takedowns against Lacerda, 2 takedowns against Silva de Andrade. No, less than 4 takedowns. He attempted 2 takedowns against Lacerda. Lacerda attempted 4 takedowns against him. Decided to lose by not wrestling against Douglas Silva de Andrade. And then attempted 6 takedowns against Lapulus. So I have no idea how much Stamann's going to wrestle. Stamann is a wrestler. He doesn't really have that much striking, but for a guy that really only has wrestling, he doesn't attempt that many takedowns. And as for Damon Blackshear was super hyped at one point. I think that he still deserves a lot of hype. I don't think that you can disrespect him too much, because at the end of the day, after he defeated Jose Johnson, he went out there and he fought on short notice against Mario Batista, my personal enemy, everyone's personal enemy. Even though Marab did do the same thing to our GOAT, Jose Aldo. He fought Mario Batista, who is still a dangerous prospect in his own right with good boxing. We did see that in the Aldo fight, on 1 week's notice after fighting Jose Johnson. So he fought Jose Johnson, got the twister, one of the first twister submissions in the promotion, come back 1 week later against Mario Batista, but then he did unfortunately get sacrificed to Montel Jackson. And at the end of the day, somebody has to get sacrificed to Montel Jackson every now and then. I do think in this matchup, though, Damon Blackshear should be able to get it done. He is a pretty big guy for the weight class. Very nice grappling as well. And the thing is, he did give someone who is finding a lot of his own success a lot of trouble in Yusuf Zalal in that matchup there. In his debut, that was on very short notice against Zalal. Zalal has now gone on to have his own career outside of the UFC and in the UFC in that time. I like Damon Blackshear here. I'm picking him to beat Cody Stamann by decision. Charles Radtke fights Matthew Semelsberger. I mean, this is going to be fun. Now, is it really the most high-level welterweight fight we're going to see? Not necessarily. And I will say one thing about Matthew Semelsberger. I used to love this guy, man. I used to think that he was really good. I was so high on him. I remember when he knocked out Martin Sano in 8 seconds, I believe it was, 15 seconds. I apologize, but he knocked out Jason Wood in 16 seconds before that. And I was like, this guy's the real deal. Beat AJ Fletcher, who's now lost 2 fights since getting cut from the promotion. So pretty poorly aging win there, unfortunately. And then he's gone on a losing streak, and a lot of these losses, I genuinely think that you can put down to just bad fight IQ. In fact, not even bad fight IQ, negative fight IQ that doesn't exist. He knocked down Jeremiah Wells multiple times in I believe at least 2 rounds. I actually think, if I'm not mistaken, he knocks down Jeremiah Wells at least once in every single round, and every single time he followed Jeremiah Wells down to the ground in the grappling, where Jeremiah Wells wants the fight in the first place, and he couldn't get the finish, and he ended up losing the fight because of it, because of that lack of fight IQ. Against Uroš Medic, he takes on a pretty crafty striker, former lightweight, so you know he's going to be pretty quick and technical. Did get KO'd. I don't think that's really a bad loss necessarily, but once again, Matthew Semelsberger, just unfortunately not really the best fight IQ, doesn't wrestle when he should, and then he wrestles when he shouldn't. He is a guy, though, that does have a lot of power, and he is as well a guy that I think, despite getting a pretty bad rap by me just then and a lot of people, does still have a lot of talent. Like, this is a guy that does make reads on the feet. He does time his shots very well. He does have a lot of power for that reason, because the timing that he lands is very good. But he takes on now against Charles Radtke, and in hindsight, Charles Radtke didn't look that bad against Carlos Prates, because we just saw what Prates did to Li Jingliang, and that was pretty nasty. Now, I think that Charles Radtke, he come into the UFC, become a pretty polarizing figure instantly, but I will give him a lot of credit for what he did prior to the UFC, because he did defeat someone who I was personally hyping up quite a lot as a great prospect in Raheem Forrest. He beat him on on a full camp, I believe, but he beat him as an underdog in the first round by submission, and Raheem Forrest was once a great prospect. I think he's lost a couple of times since then, but it is what it is. Knocks out Gilbert Urbina, kills the hype train of Urbina. I mean, that's disappeared after he beat Gabe Green, unfortunately for him. But I do think in this matchup, it just comes down to, can Radtke wrestle? I think he should wrestle. It'll be interesting to see if he's going to have the fight IQ to just be attempting takedowns here against Semelsberger. But Semelsberger's the kind of guy to just let him get a takedown and pull guard anyway. So I think that we're going to see Charles Radtke get a win here. I don't know if I can pick him by finish. I know that he did knock out Urbina and he did submit Forrest, but Semelsberger's a tough guy, man. He is a very tough guy to finish, and unless you are timing shots like Uroš Medic, I don't know if you can get a finish. Maybe Radtke can find the sub. Radtke's a better grappler than I think a lot of people give him credit for, but I do like him in this fight. Now we have Mansur Abdul-Malik fighting against Dusko Tudorovic. Should actually be a pretty interesting test for Mansur Abdul-Malik, in my opinion. Now, Dusko Tudorovic, once upon a time, this guy was an undefeated savage on the come up, but unfortunately, there's just one thing that Pillow Hands Punahali, of all people, snatched from him, and that's the chin. We just cannot trust Dusko Tudorovic's chin. This guy gets hurt, this guy gets hit, this guy gets dropped. Now, is he fighting a striker? No. Mansur Abdul-Malik, if you are unfamiliar with him, he has come over from the Contender Series. He fought in the Contender Series against Meerschaert, another wrestler, and that fight was brilliant. I thought it was great. There was a lot of wrestling, but it was just a lot of ground and pound, a lot of scrambles, just a lot of damage, really, at the end of the day. And prior to that, though, coming into it, he had just been finishing everybody in the first round, so of course there was concerns about the cardio. And even after watching his fight against Meerschaert, I think that there probably could still be some concerns about that cardio, because although that was a ridiculous pace that they both put on, and that was a lot of ground and pound that he did land, I mean, he still was very tired towards the end of that second round. And if you are going to go and wrestle with a lot of these guys, I think that you probably do want to have 3 rounds of cardio at the elite level. But Mansur Abdul-Malik, pretty young, up-and-coming prospect, a lot of power on the feet and in the hands. One thing I noted about him was that his ground and pound was lethal. He knocked out this guy, Alan St. Goliath, who I think was like 6'4", 6'5" on the LFA. Knocked him out with some brutal ground and pound. Did the same thing to his, I believe it was this opponent here. You can find some of them on UFC Fight Pass, some of them on YouTube. Of course, I did my whole Contender Series breakdown on him. Against Dusko, though, Dusko is going to have a big striking advantage. I don't really love Mansur's striking, to be honest with you. It does seem to be quite fresh, quite raw. You can tell that he's a wrestler, he's a boxer wrestler, he's going to throw punches to close the distance, but once he gets the takedown, and he will get the takedown, I'm pretty confident he will against Dusko, he's going to land big ground and pounds. He's taking on a Dusko who's been injured before, he's taking on a Dusko who we know can get knocked out and get knocked out pretty easily. I think we're going to see what we don't see often, a ground and pound KO for Mansur Abdul-Malik. You don't normally see ground and pound KOs just from someone finding the mount and then grounding and pounding out their opponent too much at the top level, but Mansur Abdul-Malik has the power and the ground and pound to do it, and I think he's going to do it here against Dusko Tudorovic. It is a good test, though, because if the fight stays on the feet, things could get interesting, but I think it's a pretty good start to Mansur Abdul-Malik's career. Now Nicolas Dalby fights against Elizeu Zaleski. This is 2 veterans going at it, and 2 veterans that have been really trying their best to turn away prospects. And one guy that was hunting prospects for the longest time is Nicolas Dalby. Now, Nicolas Dalby went on an absolute tear, fighting and beating probably some of your favorite prospects. Daniel Rodriguez at one point was a prospect on the come up. Gabriel Bonfim, loved this guy. Muslim Salikov was on a run at one point. I know he's probably, he is old enough to be my father, but still was on a run at some point. And then he fought Renat Fakhrinov. And there is probably an argument that he could have won that fight, but he gave Renat a pretty tough one. And someone else that gave Renat a very tough matchup is Elizeu Zaleski, because he fought Renat to a draw based on a 10-8 round. And if Elizeu Zaleski just kind of targeted potentially that body a little bit, which is where he hurt Renat, maybe we could have seen a late finish here. But I am going to side with Nicolas Dalby. It is going to be karate versus capoeira. Zaleski does have that capoeira dancing style that Mikhail Pereira, I guess you could argue other people made it famous, but I personally lean towards Mikhail Pereira, I guess, in the modern age doing this. But Dalby, he's just got good fundamentals, man. I know he's got that karate style. Karate, aside from Wonder Boy, typically isn't really a base for MMA that just finds the top of the top. But Dalby made it work, man, and he has given a lot of people a lot of trouble. And I do think against Zaleski, I think he's just going to do what Dalby does. He's going to be moving forward. He's going to be landing more. I think he's going to win a decision here against Zaleski. And another thing about Zaleski as well is I think that once you pressure him, you can get him to be a little bit tired. Now, I know that it was his cardio that ultimately gave him the most problems against Renat. We have seen him slow down before against other opponents. In this main card now, we have Luana Pinheiro fighting against Gillian Robertson. I like Gillian Robertson a lot in this matchup, ever since she moved down to 115 pounds. Now that I know for a fact that she can make the weight safely, I love her at the weight class. She made the weight against Pierre Rodriguez, I believe, for the first time in the UFC. Got it done by submission there, turned away a pretty decent prospect at the time. Did lose, though, to Ricci. But Ricci's Ricci. She probably is pretty close to a title shot at this point, and then won a couple of times as well since then. Pinheiro is a judo fighter, and that's kind of it. I know that she does have a couple good wins. She beat Michelle Robertson herself, but Michelle Waterson herself, I apologize. But, you know, that was a close fight. Waterson thinks she won it. It is what it is. And then since then, she's lost a couple of times. One of them being a submission loss to Angela Hill. That did slip my mind. You can't be losing to submission to Angela Hill. When you take on Gillian Robertson, I believe Gillian Robertson holds the record for the most submission wins at women's flyweight history. Has some of the most submissions in UFC women's history. She's a great grappler. Now, the thing is, she doesn't really have much else aside from the grappling. The way to get the fight down to the ground isn't great. The striking isn't great, but it has been coming along, and I do think this fight is going to go down to the ground at some point, and that's where Gillian Robertson is just an expert at finding subs. I think that she's going to submit Luana Pinheiro in this fight. And now we can move up the card to the next one, which is going to be a pretty exciting fight for one really big reason. And that is, of course, the return of the legendary GM3 returning back to action on the, of course, UFC Vegas 100 card. You cannot have UFC Vegas 100 without the legendary GM3, a man who holds a lot of records in the UFC. If you didn't know, I believe he holds a finish record at the 185-pound weight class with some of the most submission wins at 185, and he's getting up there for the most submission wins in the promotion. Very legendary fighter, GM3, a man who has fought through some tough prospects, some tough fighters in his time in the UFC, and I tell you, his time in the promotion has not gone unnoticed. I love the legendary GM3, and I'm sure that you do as well. Now, he does happen to have a pretty good opponent in this fight here. He is going to be fighting against the former multiple division champion of one championship before one championship decided to step away mostly from MMA and start mostly being a kickboxing and Muay Thai promotion. Reina de Ridder was the champion over there in that promotion in more than one weight class, I should say. And in fact, he won those two bouts at two different divisions against the same guy, Ung La Unsung. Now, Ung La Unsung is, honestly, if you guys probably don't know who he is, but he is a legend in MMA. I mean, this guy is an absolute hero in Myanmar. I believe he has his own statue in Myanmar. And he is a guy who has found a lot of success in his own career, but I guess Reina de Ridder kind of actually did expose the lack of grappling that Ung La Unsung did possess, but Ung La Unsung to this day is still putting on some pretty fun fights in the striking. Aside from that, defended those belts a couple of times, very cool, but then he did unfortunately run into a man who I think that you probably could argue is one of the most dangerous guys in MMA right now. Abdul-Malik. I think if anyone outside of the UFC was actually to give anyone in the top divisions trouble, whether that be heavyweight or light heavyweight, it probably would be Abdul-Malik. Let's be honest here, he is just a bit of a savage, and maybe he could be quite fun to see, but he's getting there, 36 years old. Let's not talk about him though. This is the matchup, a clash of titans, if you ask me. And unfortunately, I am going to have to pick Reina Dorita here. To get back into a bit more of a serious note, GM3, I love GM3. I've picked him to win so many times as an underdog, and so many times he has come so close. I still, to this day, believe that he should have won that fight against Andrei Petroski, by the way, in a fight that mostly took place in the striking, if you can believe it. Now, GM3, he's a fantastic grappler for the weight class. We don't really see his level of grappling at these higher weight classes anymore. Aside from the man that he's actually fighting right now, Reina Dorita. Reina Dorita, now, in MMA, he's already accomplished so much. If you guys don't know who he is, he's just a really good grappler for the weight class. Now, to be fair, the striking isn't really there, but I do think in this weight class, being 6'4", being so long, having so much grappling experience outside of MMA, having so much experience in MMA, I think it's going to transfer over. And to be fair, I'm surprised that they haven't made a bigger deal about him actually coming over into the promotion, because I feel like you could have Reina Dorita, that you could have this fight on the prelims of UFC 310, or UFC 309, or UFC 311, right? I mean, this is kind of a pretty big deal of a fight. You're bringing over the former multiple division champion of one championship, who probably is one of the biggest promotions aside from the UFC in the MMA world, despite them genuinely just not putting on MMA fights anymore. Yeah, it's pretty big deal, and kind of been overshadowed by the fact that he's fighting GM3. So yeah, very excited to see GM3 back in action anymore, but let's be honest, this is not going to be a striking fight. This is going to be a grappling fight, and I honestly think that we're going to see a Reina Dorita submission here. GM3, he don't get submitted very often. In fact, I almost want to say he's only been submitted 8 times in the first round. So with that being said, let's move on. Turns out my knowledge on GM3 off the top of my head was not as good as I thought it was. I thought GM3 had only been subbed 4 or 5 times. Let's move on. Ricky Turcios fights now against Benardo Sopaj. I believe Benardo Sopaj actually opened up as the favorite today. I think the line's dropped. He's -175 was the opening line. So that's always going to change for some reason or another, but I do think that Benardo Sopaj will probably finish as the favorite at the time of the fight rolling around, and I am going to pick him to win here. Let's not forget the performance that this guy had on short notice against a guy that is actually going to potentially make a lot of waves in this weight class, Vinicius Salvador. He fought Vinicius Salvador. Oh, sorry guys, I genuinely just had an exam a few hours ago. Vinicius Oliveira. Benardo Sopaj fought Vinicius Oliveira on short notice. I believe it was like a week or two's notice against Oliveira. And he gave Oliveira a tough fight in the striking as well as the grappling. And Sopaj is a no bum. This guy is a guy that does have legitimately good boxing. And you do see that in his fights in the past. Now, he has got some very, very nice hands. Very nice hands in the pocket. And you saw that against Oliveira. Now, unfortunately for him, he was on the receiving end of what probably is going to be knockout of the year for a lot of people. And that is sad to say about a guy that genuinely is only 24 years old. He did receive a massive flying knee KO loss. But let's just talk about the performance, though, for a second here. Because that was a great performance for Sopaj. I genuinely thought that it was quite nice prior to, unfortunately, the loss when he did gas out. But I think he gassed out because it was short notice. Now, once again, though, you could point to the fact that he had won most of his fights by finish early, and maybe if he does go out there against a veteran and Ricky Turcios, maybe he could gas out and Ricky Turcios could take over. But Ricky Turcios, though, I don't think he's a guy that's going to kind of present a very tough finishing ability to defeat someone like Sopaj, because Sopaj is good on the ground and good on the feet. I think that Sopaj is actually going to be the better boxer in this matchup here, and Turcios is just a guy who has had some very odd performances in his career. He did, of course, win the Ultimate Fighter. I very proudly picked him to win that Ultimate Fighter season. I usually don't do well on Ultimate Fighter predictions, so I'll hold on to that one. Now, he did beat Highstand in a very close fight where Highstand just wrestled, and Highstand has since developed to be a much more well-rounded fighter than that. He then lost to Ayman Zahabi. Not a bad loss until you watch the fight, where Turkios throws so many strikes, but it looks like he's intentionally missing. Just a real head scratcher, that performance, man. I know that Zahabi is a great fighter. That was just kind of, it was an odd performance, and then he comes back and he does win a fight against Kevin Natividad, who came back against him. Point is, I love Sopaj actually in general as a prospect, only 24 years old. I hate that he lost by KO like that. That's really, really sad. Especially just because he's only 24, but I think he can have a bright future, and I think he can start it off by beating Tercios by finish. I think he's going to finish Ricky Tercios in this fight by knockout as well. Now we move up. Karolina Kowalkiewicz fights now against Denise Gomes. Good performance for Denise Gomes. Apologize, to go up there and get a pretty good win. Kowalkiewicz, if you guys didn't know, was at one point on a 4, maybe 5 fight losing streak in the promotion. It was a 5 fight losing streak in the promotion. She fought Felice Herrick, who I believe was also on a 5 fight losing streak in the promotion, and that really did just kickstart a pretty good win streak for her. Now, hindsight's always going to be 2020, and we do look at some of these wins. Felice Herrick, as I said, 5 fight losing streak. Silvana Gomez Suarez wasn't in the promotion for long, but she was fun while she was in there. She had a lot of power. Vanessa come on, man. Anyway, yeah, just not really the best competition. And Denise Gomes has kind of just been tested so far in her career. She came into the UFC with not a lot of experience, but her aggression and her power really put her up there with some of the better fighters early. Now, I did actually pick her to lose against Angela Hill because I thought it was going to be too much too soon. I didn't think that she could close the distance as effectively, and that is actually exactly what happened. But then, unfortunately, she beat Eduardo Mora. And the reason why I say unfortunately is because Eduardo Mora, she ain't going to be fighting at 115 anymore. She missed weight for this fight a lot. Only by half a pound, sorry. She missed weight for another fight by a lot, and then missed weight for this one. She's gone from 115, and that's a prospect gone. But Denise Gomes, we've got a pretty good prospect out of her. Gomes is an aggressive Muay Thai striker. She's pretty short. She's very, very powerful. She's always going to be moving forward, and she's always going to be trying to find a pretty tough shot where she can find the KO because she does have great power for the weight class. Kowalkiewicz is 39. I know that the wins have been fun, but at this point, I just don't think that she's going to be able to keep up with Denise Gomes. And I think Denise Gomes can close the distance and land a knockout shot in this fight. So I am going to pick Denise Gomes actually to win by knockout in this matchup against Karolina Kowalkiewicz. And I do think that she should be able to get it done with a pretty decent amount of confidence. And now we move up to the co-main event, which is honestly a very good fight, and honestly could potentially even headline the card. I think some people could actually argue, because I think that Cody Garbrandt still actually does have a pretty big name at this point. And before we do get into this co-main event, I do want to say that I struggle to pick Miles Johns fights, man, because I just don't know how this guy is going to look when he shows up, because it looks like he fights with a different game plan every single time. When he fought against Douglas Silva de Andrade, he attempted, I believe, only 3 takedowns, but when he fought against Cody Gibson, he attempted 8 takedowns. When he fought against Vince Morales, he attempted 12 takedowns, and I think he only ever attempted 1 takedown against John Castaneda. So depending on the opponent, depends on the style that Miles Johns is going to show up with, because sometimes, honestly, it makes me think that he's abandoned the wrestling, which is what his base is. His base is a wrestling base, but then sometimes it looks like he's abandoned the wrestling and he's moving on to something else, just kind of being a striker. Who knows? I honestly think that for Miles Johns to win this fight, I think he's going to have to do it in the wrestling, because I just saw Cody Garbrandt go out there and have a very good performance against Davison Figueiredo, and he looked very good, I thought, on the feet, and it was actually the grappling that really let him down in that matchup. Now, first off, he looked massive in there compared to Davison Figueiredo, especially considering he was able to make 125 pounds not even that long ago necessarily. He looked huge for the weight class compared to Figgy, who I know is a former flyweight, of course, but he looked huge for the weight class, and the boxing looked good, the striking looked really good, but we were able to see Figueiredo get takedowns as the much smaller guy, and when the fight did get down to the ground in the first round, and of course the second, that's where we were able to see Davison Figueiredo really take over in the grappling. But if that takedown defense is something that we think that Cody Garbrandt can keep going and keep the fight on the feet against a guy like Miles Johns, I give the striking advantage to Cody Garbrandt. I give the boxing advantage to Cody Garbrandt. Of course, the chin is always going to be a worry, and it does kind of suck seeing that happen, because He is a talented fighter, and he was at one point the champion of this weight class. And if you guys can believe it, Cody Garbrandt was my favorite fighter when I first started watching MMA. I first started watching MMA in 2016. I haven't really been able to really pinpoint the exact time, but I do remember one of the first cards that I ever watched did have Garbrandt versus Almeida on it. He, of course, won by KO. Then I tuned in for 202. And then, of course, I got my dad to buy me the pay-per-view for UFC 207, and it was great because my sister was a Ronda Rousey fan at the time as well, and this was a very, very nice card looking back at it in hindsight, right? But anyway, let's get back to actually the fight. I still do have probably, admittedly, maybe a little bit of bias towards Cody Garbrandt still, just because he is one of my fan favorite fighters, but at the end of the day, the guys that he's been beating and has come back from the pretty bad losing sort of run that he did have haven't been that good. He's been fighting Tresean Jones, who unfortunately is now out of the promotion. Brian Kelleher's out of the promotion now. Really looked a step ahead in that fight, just kind of dominated him, and then fought Figgy. Like, this is a step up in competition if I've ever seen it. But fighting Miles Johns, a guy who, if he chooses to wrestle, I think that he has a very good chance of winning this fight against Cody. But if he just chooses to box with Cody, and he might, because they might just be relying on him landing a big shot and knocking out Cody Garbrandt, then maybe we could see something different as well. But in all honesty, I like Garbrandt in this matchup. I do think he is the better striker. Now, there is always that X factor in the fact that he gets a bit aggressive. He does leave himself open to getting hurt, to getting KO'd. The performance against Tresean Jones, although he was styling on Tresean Jones, the numbers don't really tell the full story. That was Tresean Jones made that fight a lot closer than it was meant to be. I'll say that much anyway. And he actually had to go to some wrestling as well towards the end of the fight to secure it. But I think against Miles Johns, man, I just watched that performance against Figueiredo, and I know that he lost by submission. He looked so good on the feet against Figgy. He really did, and I think he can kind of pull something off similar in this matchup against Miles Johns. So I'm going to pick Cody here. He does have a lot of power, but I'm going to pick him to win by decision. Johns is a tough guy. He's not going to get KO'd very easily. Now we have Neil Magny fighting in the main event, of course, now against Carlos Prates. Carlos Prates, I will be very proud to say that I might have been... I definitely wasn't the first, because there were people before me that were hyping up Carlos Prates and saying that he was going to be the next big thing. However, on the Contender Series, before he even fought on the Contender Series against Rich Ramirez, I did have a lot of belief in him in my prediction video, saying that this guy could really become something, and that is probably the highlight of my 2023 Contender Series season, because if you were around for it, unfortunately, that was a very bad run for me on my predictions for the Contender Series 2023. They were rough, man, but it's one thing about covering the Contender Series, I will probably say, I've probably seen more tape on Carlos Prates than most other people have that are also kind of following him and predicting his fights and stuff like that. And I can tell you right now, there is actually a key moment in his career where he stopped losing. And I know that sounds crazy, but there just is. This guy used to lose, and the reason why he would lose was because he was getting taken down, and he was getting taken down easily. This guy could get taken down by a gust of wind at some point, but he goes in there against Joseph Luciano, starts defending the takedowns, starts winning, and then all of a sudden, he doesn't really have to worry about the takedown threat anymore, and he just starts knocking people out in the first round over and over and over and over again. And man, I am happy he got that Contender Series opportunity. Did I think that he was going to be fighting in a main event in 2024? No. No, I didn't. I'm not LeBron James of predicting the future, but I did think that he could find some very good success in the UFC. Not this much, and not this quickly, but he has. And that probably is a lot of credit to the fighting nerds. And I want to say another thing as well, to give a lot of credit to Neil Magny, because I am going to pick Carlos Prates to win this fight. I am seeing a lot on the We Want Picks Discord. I haven't been that active in there recently just because of my exams, but man, I tell you guys, there's so many people out there that are just going to put it all on Carlos Prates. All of the money on Carlos Prates KO, all in, have him finished like 20 parlays for the card, this and that. I think no, I don't think do that. Yes, put him in a few parlays, because even though he's minus 700, if you have Bet365, you're going to get a 5% boost. I know, trust me, I know, I love my parlays, I love my multis, but But like, don't put him in all of them, because if someone's going to really pull off a crazy upset in the main event of UFC Vegas 100, let's talk about it. UFC Vegas 100. It's a big event. GM3 is on the main card. It's gonna be Magny. Magny is a guy who was upset before. He upset very recently against Mike Malott. He upset against Phil Rowe, even though I think he was a slight favorite against Rowe. Once again, I think he was a slight favorite against Daniel Rodriguez, but he was an underdog against Max Griffin, and he was an underdog against Jeff Neal. This is a guy who does upset the books all of the time. This is a guy that does try his best to kill your parlay. And one thing I will give a lot of credit to Neil Magny for, and I have done this multiple times now, is a lot of people kind of do just say when a new prospect comes along, let's give him Magny. Magny is that guy, man. Magny accepts these fights. He's just like this strength of schedule, win or lose. This is crazy. 16-0 Michael Morales. Yes, he got dominated and smoked in that fight. No one else is picking up the phone. Ian Gary when he was up and coming. Gilbert Burns when he was not up and coming. I believe this was kind of when Gilbert Burns was actually very highly ranked, but still, nonetheless. Shavkat Rakhmonov when he was up and coming. Michael Chiesa even when he was up and coming. I mean, there's people out there that other people that aren't accepting this amount of tough and hard fights every single time. And now Magny is that guy. But the reason why I think that he has a chance to kill a lot of people's parlays is because of what I just said about Carlos Prates. Carlos Prates' turning point in his career come when he could defend takedowns. But here's the thing. He has been defending takedowns incredibly well, even in the LFA, before coming into the UFC, even on SFT, the Brazilian regional show. He hasn't really fought a wrestler, aside from Charles Radtke, I would say, that has been going out there and trying to take him down all of the time. And although Neil Magny is a very rangy guy himself, he is still a guy that is dangerous in the clinch. And not really dangerous in the clinch, like, oh, he's going to try and find a KO in the clinch, you know. He's dangerous in the clinches in the fact that he's going to close the distance against Prates, and he's going to try and make the fight boring by closing the distance against Prates, getting takedowns on occasion, and controlling on top. So I think that maybe if you do have 20 parlays, your entire night is riding on Carlos Prates KO, you could sweat it. Now, what I do actually think happens is Carlos Prates is going to go out there, do a snarl, and knock out Neil Magny probably in the first or the second round. But I do just want to say that. I think that there's a chance that Neil Magny is going to be live for an upset, and that is why I just don't recommend putting all of your parlays on Prates. I think that's just something that you need to consider. Don't put half your bankroll on Prates KO. Like, I think that there's a lot smarter things to do with that. But yeah, I'm picking Prates. I'm picking Prates by KO, high confidence. Probably my highest confidence pick of the card. But you've got to consider this. You're looking at a minus 700 favorite. The bookies know that Prates is probably going to win, but you know they're leaving a little bit there for maybe Magny to get an upset. I'm picking Prates by KO. The world is picking Prates by KO. I'm just saying there is an upset potentially, and it's 5 rounds. Magny's a tough guy. I know he's been getting KO'd recently, but he took a beating against Ian Gary. Didn't get finished. You know, if it goes into the 3rd, 4th, 5th round, we don't really know what Prates looks like, because Prates has just been KOing everyone recently. I do think this is a Prates KO coming, though, and I do think that if that takedown defense is as good as I think it is, he's going to be the real deal, and man, what I would do for Carlos Prates versus Michael Venom Page, I think that would be fun, and for a lot of reasons, actually, because I think MVP, like he did against Ian Gary, would actually try and wrestle, so it'll be an interesting test for both guys. But let me know what you think in the comments below. I do want to say this one thing as well. I love this poster. I think this is one of the better posters that they've done. It's very, very basic, but I love it. It's good. Now, I'll see you guys in the next one.